Evening, guys. What we're looking at today is we're installing your Scanx Geo into Examine Pro. We're going to install the drivers for your Scanx Geo, and we're also going to show you how to set that up in Examine Pro, along with some macros to make it a little bit more user-friendly for yourself and the staff, especially if you have multiple devices within inside Examine Pro. Would like to thank my sponsor here at Living Loans for helping us make this happen. The first thing we're going to do when we install these drivers is make sure there's no other competing drivers. Scanx or VistaScan don't like each other being installed. That's what I'm doing here, just making sure there's no VistaScan or DBS Win drivers installed. Then we can go ahead with getting on to finding these drivers for the Scanx are actually online at the Air Techniques website. So we can download this directly from the internet. As you see here, we're going to the Air Techniques page, running a little bit slow, but we'll get these downloaded. We'll click on this revision here, S3155, download. Now that's complete, we can obviously go ahead and install these. We need to run this as admin, just to make sure there's no issues with rights when they're copying the images from the Scanx to the shared folder. They go from a Scanx folder into a temporary folder first in case they don't make it, and then they get pulled from there and go into the imaging software that we're using. In this case, that imaging software, as you know, is going to be Examine Pro. So we'll just get along and install this now. Alright, now we've got that installed. That will be in the Programs 86 file in the VistaScan. Even though it's a Scanx, they've taken over DBS Win, so we can utilize that same program as you would for DBS Win. Now this is a good area to pop up. It's basically saying we need to run it as administrator in this instance to be able to configure it to find the Scanx. The next stage of this will be to then test the Scanx to make sure that we can obviously find it outside any imaging software. It's always better or best to make sure that it's working outside before you go ahead and try and configure it inside. That way you know you're on the right page. The best setting for this type of unit would probably be the high, so the middle of the two. Obviously you can get a quicker scan through on standard or on the first selection, but obviously it's not as sharp. The high one, most people find it's too long to go through, and a lot of the tweaking for the imaging can be done inside either software. You can do it in the VistaScan, or you can do it in the Examine Pro software also. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to test it inside of Examine Pro. So we'll bring up a test patient here and bring up one of the test patients, and then we'll move across to Examine Pro by clicking on the chart option. Once we've got the customer up, we then click the little eye icon there for images, and now we're into the imaging software, Examine Pro. What we're doing here under the module is just making sure that we have the VistaScan module installed. If you don't, you can go to Setup and the Modules tab in here. We're just going to configure the Scanx module, which is the same as the VistaScan. Normally they allow multiple images on the status frame. It needs to be selected if you want to run more than one plate through per scan. You will need to leave the settings tab open for the software to actually run correctly. If you choose the info tab, you'll get another error. So now we're just going to test it inside Examine Pro. As you can see, that's picked up the Vista config settings. We've got a test patient across. You can select the high option, Scanner ready. So now we're confident again, now it's working inside of Examine Pro. If you have multiple devices going through Examine Pro, some people have cameras or the OPG scanners, it's always best to set up a macro. That way there the staff won't get confused about what module to select under the acquisition tab. In this instance, we only have one selected, but I'm going to show you how to set up the macro anyway, which is effectively a shortcut to doing the selection through the acquisition module option and then pressing acquire. So making a macro will tidy it up. If you can imagine, if you have an OPG, you don't really want your staff coming in, selecting OPG, pushing the button every time. So a shortcut to each of the devices or a piece of equipment you have on within Examine Pro is a better way to go. So we've just created a button, we've labeled it. Now we're going to record the macro. So as you can see, we select the Vista Scan, Scanx. Now we actually use this extra acquisition button down here to go through the acquiring as opposed to going file acquire. I found that using file acquire ends up causing crashes when you're recording the macro. Once you've recorded the macro to its end, Control F12, macro done. Close over there. Now that we've recorded that macro, now we're just going to test it to make sure there's no errors. Yep, good. So that macro is working fine. Scanner's still ready. And what we'll do now is we'll just shift that button up into a more easier access area for our customers. Go to the Customize toolbar, drag it up from the bottom, hold it down, and drop it up at the top. So that will put it up into the top left-hand corner of that little dialog box or options box you see in the bottom left-hand corner. Save that, exit, and you can see that number 1 button for the Scanx has put itself in the top left-hand corner. A lot more accessible, obvious for the staff and the users. And that's it. That's it. Set up an Examine Pro, tested. Any questions, let us know or comment. Thank you very much.